Shabbat Shalom. One of the most calming, peaceful, pastoral things I did in the last 20 months of this pandemic was to read a book titled Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat in Troubling Times by Catherine May. Released during COVID, it tells the story of a time a few years ago, actually, when May became unmoored during a dark period in her life and recognized the need to engage in the process she calls wintering, of slowing down, of resting, retreating. In her own words about the book, she said, "I wanted to make it really clear that although a lot of wintering is about my love of winter and affection for the cold and even the dark, that wintering really is a metaphor for those phases in our life when we feel frozen out or unable to take the next step. And that can come at any time, in any season," she says, "in any weather. It has nothing to do, actually, with the physical cold. So it's a very useful, from a narrative point of view," she says in an interview, "to be able to start with what happened, which was an unseasonably warm, sunny day in September in England just before my 40th birthday," she writes, "when my husband fell very suddenly ill. And as she says in the beginning of the book, some winters happen in the sun." What a perfect way to describe the period we've lived through since March of 2020. One long communal experience of wintering. It has been isolating. It has been exhausting. On the one hand, for many of us, we've worked harder than we ever have. And on the other hand, it was a time of retreat, of rest, of restoration. And yet May sees in wintering opportunities to learn and grow. That in our darkest times and places, she writes, spring is on the horizon. Listen to this excerpt from the book. "All the careful preparations that animals make to endure the cold, foodless months, hibernation, migration, trees dropping leaves, this is no accident. The changes that take place in winter are a kind of alchemy, an enchantment performed by ordinary creatures to survive. Plants and animals don't fight the winter. They don't pretend it's not happening and try to carry on living the same lives that they lived in the summer. They perform an extraordinary act of metamorphosis to get them through. This wintering," she says, "it's time for reflection, recuperation, for slow replenishment. Doing these deeply unfashionable things," she says, "slowing down, letting your spare time expand, getting enough sleep, resting is a radical act now, but it's essential." You see why this is essential reading for pandemic quarantining times. I've spoken to so many of us, so many people who, while acknowledging the loss, the trauma of this time, have also experienced their own spiritual reset. The reflection and recuperation May speaks about rediscovering a sense of balance in our lives, returning to core values, time with family, walks with loved ones, self-care, pandemic dogs, right? This is a thing. Homes were purchased. Homes were put in order. This extended period of wintering, it's often felt quite nourishing, to be honest with you. It's not surprising that people want to continue working remotely, continue to watch Park Avenue Synagogue on the live stream, remaining in that safe, warm, comfortable, nurturing cocoon of their homes. Now we read a similar story in this morning's Parsha. There is, as Brody explained, as we read in the Torah, lawlessness in the world. There's been a breakdown of the social order, and God is going to destroy the world and to begin anew. The floodwaters come. Noah, his family, 2 of each creature go on to the ark. And while the actual flood lasted for 40 days and 40 nights, Noah and his family spent about 370 days on this ark. Can you imagine what that experience must have been like? Now, picture books make it look very fun, all right? But think about it. 370 days on the ark, the close quarters with family, the smell of the animals, the effort required to care for, to feed them. The Midrash tells us that for the entire year on the ark, Noah did not sleep for even one moment. How could he? And yet, when the waters retreated, Noah didn't leave the ark. He had to be told by God, "Say min hateva." Leave the ark. In the imperative, get out of the ark, is what God said to Noah. Not please leave, not it's time to leave. Get out of this ark. The Midrash picks up on this and it says, Noah said to himself, "Since I only entered the ark with the permission of God, shall I leave without God's permission?" And God said to Noah, "Are you looking for permission? In that sense, in this case, Noah, I give you permission. Please leave the ark," says the Midrash. It wasn't that Noah was reluctant. The Midrash wants to rehabilitate Noah. It's just that Noah he had really good manners, right? And he didn't want to leave without asking permission, right? It's a generous read of the situation. Now, I have a less generous read of the story. Yes, on the one hand, life may have been challenging on the ark. But on the other hand, life was incredibly easy for Noah. He was content to be surrounded by family, caring only, as Brody said, for the people closest to him. The idea of leaving the ark, of going out into the world, of taking responsibility, of repairing the world, of rebuilding that which had been destroyed, of looking out for the other. Well, we know from the beginning of the story that while Noah may have been righteous, he was no one's hero. He didn't save humanity. He saved himself. He saved his family. Collective responsibility wasn't yet in his vocabulary. The biblical story is working up towards it. Right? We're getting there. We're getting to the story of Abraham, who will advocate for the innocent people in Sodom and Amorah. But we're not there yet. So nobody should be surprised that Noah doesn't want to leave the ark, afraid of what life might be like in the unknown, new, dark world. And even if you say he wanted to leave, Noah was stuck. He couldn't do it. He couldn't find the courage. He couldn't find the resolve or the strength to leave that ark. Too much time had passed. And even though he might cry out for redemption, Noah didn't see a path forward. And that's when God steps in. Say min hateva. Get out of the ark. The extended period of wintering, Noah, it's coming to an end. Yes, it would be nice to stay suspended in the period of wintering, of rest, of reflection, of self-reflection, of being with family. But at some point, you have to leave. You have to re-enter history. That's why, by the way, we break a glass at the end of a wedding. Of course, it would be nice to stay under the chuppah, looking out and seeing only the people you love and cherish the most in this heightened sense of joy and celebration. But couples have to get back to the world, create families, build homes. And that's why we take a walk around the block at the end of Shiva, at the end of our 7 days of mourning a loved one. We want to hold on, not to our grief, but to the sense of attachment that we feel for the loved one we have lost. We worry that when we return to work, when we return to our lives, that somehow that connection will be lost. But we can't mourn forever. We have lives to lead, memories to build, worlds to repair. So we have our rituals. We break that glass. We break out of the cocoon of Shiva and walk around the block, returning to the world. Friends, I say this with humility. I say this with a deep sensitivity to those who are struggling with the question of how to venture back out into the world safely. And I say this aware that the pandemic is ongoing, if perhaps shifting to the endemic stage. We need to get out of the ark. We need to return to our lives. We need to reconnect and re-embrace our community or our communities in person. Our default needs to be in person. This afternoon, in a wonderful step for us, we will be having Kiddish on the roof. I believe, is this the first Kiddish? You may try to get Talmudic with me and say, well, we had a Kiddish on Sukkot, but the Sukkah was up. All right? This is the first non-holiday Kiddish at Park Avenue Synagogue in person since February of 2020. So if you're watching in the neighborhood online and you want to come for Kiddish, come join us. All right? This Tuesday night, you are in dialogue with Dan Doctoroff, who wrote a powerful op-ed in the Times several weeks ago about the return of New York City. It is open in person. It will be live streamed. Our in-person RSVPs aren't quite what we'd like. So join us in person for this dialogue with Rabbi Cosgrove and Dan Doctoroff. In the next week, you will receive an email from Park Avenue Synagogue announcing that daily Minion, I'm not giving the exact date, because not all the clergy know yet. We are returning to in-person Minion. Right? Yeah. I know. All right. Yes, we will continue to put out the very best on live stream. We will continue to build PAS Connect. We love the fact that we have a worldwide community, but we are at our core an in-person business, building Jewish life one soul at a time. And while, believe me, many of us have certainly enjoyed aspects of the sudden and extended shift to our virtual platform and our own experiences of wintering, the simple truth is that and I know I speak for all of us here, we miss seeing you face to face because we understand the human power of healing, the transformative act of sitting together with another person, speaking to a bar mitzvah on the bima in this space, lifting people up with our hands and with our presence. That is religion. Literally, the word comes from the same Latin root as the word ligament, the connective tissue of our bodies and of our souls. And that connective tissue is a critical building block of our tradition. Yesterday afternoon before Shabbat, I had the privilege of standing under the chuppah with a young couple. It was actually the second time we had done it. The first time was exactly 1 year ago, October 8th, 2020. We found a quiet spot in Central Park by the bridge in the south of the park, the famous bridge, I can't remember the name of it. Together with their parents, we celebrated their wedding. And it was beautiful. It was an act of defiance in the face of COVID The joy and celebration must continue. That has always been the Jewish way. And then yesterday, we did it again for 150 guests down in Tribeca. And I watched and I listened as someone made a toast to the couple and ended with the words, L'chaim, to life. And I thought about the moment in our story this morning when Noah finally does have the courage to leave the ark. And what does he do when he emerges? Well, Rabbi Cosgrove explains he plants a vineyard, all right? But he also harvested the grapes and he gets drunk. He's too afraid. He's too overwhelmed at the task before him. It's an act of deflection. And while this first appearance of wine is a negative one, as Noah tries to cope with this awesome responsibility ahead of him to rebuild the world, Rabbi Soloveitchik in his podcast reminds us that wine is not a drink that Jews have rejected throughout the generations. We sanctify our lives with wine. We sanctify Shabbat with wine. We drink 4 cups of wine on Passover. I picked up the cup of wine yesterday and made the blessings for this wedding couple. And yesterday, after the wedding, we all lifted our glasses and we made a toast not to avoid life, but to embrace and celebrate life. L'chaim, we said. And as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs notes, chaim in Hebrew, or chaim, actually exists only in the plural. So technically, l'chaim isn't to life, but to lives. The meaning, he suggests, is that life truly becomes meaningful, not when we are alone in our homes, but when it is shared with others, when we are in relationship with others, when we strengthen the bonds of our community, our communities with others. No doubt the winter will still have plenty of remaining bite, Catherine May writes. Still, she continues, there will be snowdrops peeking up within weeks, and then the first crocuses. It won't be long. The year begins again, she says. Tsei min hateva. It's time. It's time to leave the ark. It's time to venture outside. It's time to remind others when they are ready, it is safe to do so, and you can take our hands and we'll walk with you. There's work to be done. As the year begins again, let's get ready to work together. I look forward to seeing you all in shul. Shabbat shalom.